I'm with Father Kelly, and we're talking about Magdala Center in Tiberias. And Father Kelly, what is Magdala Center?
The Magdala Center is a center in the town of Magdala. And Magdala maybe rings a bell. Mary Magdalene. And this town still exists. There's a new Migdal, which is the Hebrew word for Magdala. And that's also just a little bit further inland, a few hundred yards from the biblical Migdal. So there is, the word Migdal means a tower. And this town is just north of Tiberias on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And it's not too far from the Mount of Beatitudes and not too far from Capernaum. So it's right in the corner of the lake where Jesus actually did about 80% of his public ministry. And the Magdala Center is primarily a center of hospitality for visitors, for pilgrims to the Holy Land. And they come to Israel at the Sea of Galilee, and they need places to stay. So this is one of the motivations for the Magdala Center. But the Magdala Center actually has a lot of other features to it, and it was primarily inspired originally by our experience at the Notre Dame Center in Jerusalem. And the Notre Dame Center is a very comprehensive facility with about 280 beds, 150 rooms, a huge auditorium for 500 people. It has conference rooms. It has a beautiful chapel and 4 restaurants, and it's in a very nice location. It's right at the corner of the old city, at the new gate, right beside City Hall of the New Jerusalem. So it straddles, if you will, the no man's land, traditionally in the very difficult period behind us now, of the establishment of the State of Israel and the conflicts that ensued. And it's right on this division line between East and West Jerusalem. So it's a place that meanwhile has come to Vatican ownership because of also complex history here. There was nobody able to recover it for its original purpose to serve Christians. So the Vatican stepped in and recovered Notre Dame. And therefore it is extraterritorial and so therefore neutral. So because of its location east-west Jerusalem and because of its technical neutrality, real neutrality today, then it becomes a favored place for a lot of grassroots encounters between very different people, between Palestinians and Jewish people, with organizations who want to foster bridge building. Find this a very hospitable place, and neither Palestinians nor Jewish Israelis have a problem meeting here, and so they feel comfortable. And then it's also a home address really for a lot of Christian events because of our infrastructure. Then they can have their celebrations here, and it's a very spacious place and it has a lot of other aspects to the infrastructure. And then it's also a place where there's interreligious presence. And we have a lot of guests, Jewish people coming for Shabbat sometimes. They're more secular Jews. And then we'd also have groups of Muslim people coming here occasionally. And then mixed groups of all kinds. And maybe over 30% of our guests are not Catholic, just even staying here overnight through the weeks and the months and the years. So there's really no center of this magnitude that enables this kind of encounter in Galilee. There was our original motivation then to do something similar in Galilee, and that's how the Magdala Center was originally born as a concept. At least part of the motivation was there.
But also on the Magdala site there in the Galilee is an archaeological site as well, which is quite unique, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. When we got the permissions to develop the project, part of the preconditions are that you do an archaeological exploration. The original exploration yielded the result that there was nothing there. And so we had 2 prayer intentions. The first prayer intention was, we don't want to find anything, so that would only delay us and make things more expensive. And the second prayer intention was, if we do find something, let it be worthwhile. And you won't believe what we found.
So what did you actually find on the site?
Well, we found extraordinary surprises. We are actually digging up the 1st century town which Mary Magdalene knew, and therefore the disciples knew. And it's actually at the head end of the trail that comes from Nazareth to the lake. So there is pretty strong certainty that this would have been the pathway Jesus would have walked from Nazareth on his way to Capernaum, for example. And he would have come out at Magdala between the hills on the Wadi Hammam, right behind Mount Arbel. So therefore, the possibility that Jesus saw this town is also very, very real. But then one day in the end of August 2009, the archaeologists realized that they were excavating a first century synagogue. A synagogue in Magdala. That immediately triggers a lot of thoughts. First of all, it says in the Gospels that Jesus healed the people and taught in their synagogues. And in this occasion, then, we are dealing with an extraordinary discovery. It's the first ever synagogue opened up where Jesus walked from his time. So then we obviously want to go back to the Gospel and read that passage from Matthew chapter 4. He went around the whole of Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing all kinds of disease and illness among the people. So the big question is, was Jesus in this synagogue? Well, I'm not a fundamentalist, so I'm not going to say he surely was, absolutely, definitively. It's only, I would think then, 99.99% sure that he was. So, you know, it's really a great joy. But obviously then there's a deeper and earlier reason to be happy. For the Jewish people, it's a synagogue. And this also has great significance for us as Christians, and we'll get to that in a moment. But this happens to be the 7th first century synagogue ever discovered. And it turns out, because of the beautiful frescoes, look here, Paul, at these frescoes. They are just like the ones we have which were described by Vesuvius near Naples in, what's the name of that little town?
Pompeii.
Then we have these extraordinary mosaics. And this mosaic, actually this 8 octagonal type of mosaic, has 3 colors of stones. It's got the dark blacker stones, the white stones, and then it's got this reddish ones in the very center of the octagonal piece, and then it's got another row of red ones between 2 rows of blacks forming the outer circle around this octagonal form. And then it has in the corners gammas, and then a square in framing it. And this is actually the 3rd of its type first century mosaic found in Israel. And I'll just cut short to a year ago, we found the 4th one 50 yards away, right at the purification ritual baths. So the site is particularly privileged archaeologically. And inside the synagogue, it's made up of 3 rectangles or almost squares of benches, 2 very close together, forming, let's say, a resemblance to the temple, 2 inner courts, and then an outer court that was for the Gentiles in the temple. It's a bigger area inside the synagogue, with the 3rd row of seating just inside the outer wall and periphery of the synagogue. Then there were some columns, pieces of columns left. But the biggest part of the discovery was this incredible stone found inside the synagogue. And it was placed not quite in the center, but almost. And this stone was very remarkable. First of all, a machine hit the top of it, a digger, and damaged the top corner of one of the designs on the stone. The stone is, as you see, sculpted on all sides except the bottom. So the 4 sides and the top of the stone are sculpted. And you have these incredible emblems or symbols on the stone. You have 2 chalices or cups, and under each of them you have a bread. Now if I ask you, Paul, what this is, you'll probably say it looks like a heart. Like a heart. But actually the archaeologists say it's an ivy leaf. And there are 6 of them. There are 3 more over here. And this is a symbol of eternal life. But now you see here in the center we have this wonderful hexagonal piece, and there are like 6 petals. It's like a flower, and then it's surrounded with a circle of petals on the outside, also 6. And the first time this sign is ever known according to the archaeologists, is in Egypt on a temple 4,000 years ago, even before Abraham. Now, ours is the first one that has the petals in the outer periphery. Others have just little dotted lines and so forth. But this is a symbol of eternal life, and you will find it here in Jerusalem at the Israeli Museum on ossuaries, and you'll also find them at the ossuaries in Dominus Flevit on the Mount of Olives, which are said to be constituent of the first Judeo-Christian burials in Jerusalem. So we're talking about 1st century, 2nd century burials. So there's another symbol of eternal life. We have these palm trees, but we didn't get to the main part. If we come around to the front of the stone, which was on the northern side, so if you were looking at it, you're facing Jerusalem, what do we find, Paul? What do you see there?
A beautiful menorah.
Absolutely. This is a menorah, a 7-branched candelabra. And this menorah is very special. As it turns out, we know the synagogue was out of action by the year 67. So it's a pre-temple destruction synagogue. And that's very important. We might want to come back to that again because of the importance that has for even the gospel stories. But this menorah turns out to be the oldest menorah ever found on stone. Up to now, the record was held in Italy, actually in Rome, on the Titus Arch, which commemorated the Roman victory over the Jewish people and the destruction of Jerusalem. And obviously the prize piece was the menorah. And this figures on the Titus Arch, as you see, and that was the oldest menorah ever known up to now, up to 3 years ago. And you see the oldest menorah up to 3 years ago is no longer the oldest menorah, and second place really doesn't win the English Derby. So you see here the one in the Titus Arch, it has circular branches, relatively strong semicircles, and our menorah, imagine a priest is saying our menorah. So our menorah does not have a circular form branch, but has a U V-shaped branch. And then the stem, notice the stem, Paul, that it comes down to the base, and just as it sits on the base, it has a complex form, which the archaeologists understand to be the representation of a triangle, or a tripod, actually. So you have a 3-footed base under the menorah. And this is very important because it's also part of Jewish tradition. So the discovery of this menorah in Magdala in September 2009 confirmed the ancient Jewish tradition about the shape of the menorah. So this is very, very significant. I have shown this to rabbis in Europe and in the United States, and their eyes tear up when they see it.
So when you buy a piece of land here in Israel, you don't really quite know what you're going to get, do you? How long have you been actually digging in Magdala?
Well, we started to dig in the summer of 2009, and we had the synagogue by August, September. It actually was announced on the 10th of September, 11th of September.
And you totally didn't expect anything like this?
Well, you know, we had a big hope. Paul, you've been around the Holy Land, and maybe many of our listeners have been here. And when you go to a place like Tabgha, where you have the multiplication of the loaves, or you go to the Nativity Basilica in Bethlehem, or to the Church of the Agni in the Garden in Gethsemane at the foot of the Mount of Olives, you will see mosaics from the Byzantine period. And that means there were churches on those locations in the Byzantine period. So we're talking about the 3rd to the 6th, 7th century. So 13, 14, 1500 years ago, 1600 years ago. So we thought, since we know from tradition that there was a Byzantine basilica in Magdala, intact still, until the 14th century, so well after the Crusades were beaten, then we were hoping maybe we will find a little bit of mosaic from the floor of the Byzantine basilica. And that would be a huge thrill. And maybe we'll still find it. But what did we find? A 1st century synagogue from the time of Jesus. Amazing.
With the oldest ever menorah seen.
And the most beautiful synagogue of antiquity. Yeah. And you want some more Guinness Book of Record titles? Yeah. It's just off the charts. The Israeli Antiquities Authority say that this carved stone is the most important discovery they have ever made related to the Second Temple itself. It's really a huge gift. And we hope that this gift then, we find, you know, every gift is obviously also a task. There's a beautiful expression in Germany, it's very logical. The word for gift is Gabe. And the word for task is Aufgabe. So every Gabe has an Aufgabe. So every gift has a corresponding task. So if we receive this gift, we feel that the Lord is through his providence, is indicating a path to us. Now, there's another amazing thing that happened by God's providence. We had planned, because of wanting a very open center at Magdala, respecting everybody's confession of faith, we wanted to have an ecumenical chapel. And this is the first major holy site development in the third millennium. We're after Vatican II, so we wanted to have this very welcoming spirit. And on the spot where we were exactly planning to have the ecumenical chapel, guess what we found? The synagogue. So there we were, kind of proud probably, looking up to heaven and saying, aren't we good? We're opening up our arms for all of our separated brothers and sisters. And guess what we hear from heaven? Well, open them up wider, because now you have to take in also our Jewish older brothers and sisters. And so then the curve opens up to be very welcoming for everybody. So we feel that the center now is enriched archaeologically, as you asked at the beginning, by a major gift which emphasizes and underscores that first thought of having a very open center where everybody could find that they belong. You know, we all have a root here. We all belong here. We're all at home here. A Baptist, a Presbyterian, an Evangelical, an Episcopalian, an Anglican can say, I'm connected to Magdala. I'm connected to the Sea of Galilee. And a Jewish person through the synagogue will say, well, I'm connected too. And we didn't have all these divisions back then, because when this synagogue was still operational until the year 67, we obviously didn't have the divisions we have now in Christianity. But we didn't even have a formal, let's say, institutional separation from the Jewish community, because basically all those followers of Jesus in the first century were Jews. There were some converts from outside, from the Goyim, from the peoples, from the nations, but basically all of these people were, the first followers were Jewish, and they probably considered themselves better Jews than the ones that didn't follow Jesus, because they were fulfilling the scriptures and they had this great idea. Well, at that point, they were still feeling themselves completely Jewish, and they were completely following Jesus. So then there you have an extraordinary togetherness, which we then subsequently lost with great suffering and great sadness, and also many bad consequences. And hopefully also this new gift will help towards a greater mutual understanding and a growing together, both between Christians and Jewish people, and also between the various Christian confessions of faith and communities of faith. And then also in that spirit that we will open our hearts and embrace people of all faith and no faith.
Now, there on the site you've got something huge, but what other little artifacts have you been finding there as well?
Well, there are so many. I don't know, Paul, do you have 2 hours? We would need a lot of time to go over all of the artifacts. You know, one of the most intriguing things we found were very, very small. Yeah. Terribly small. Yeah. Incredibly small. The size of my little finger nail. Cubic, made of bone. Guess what it was?
What's
that? A die.
Wow.
And if you have 2 die, what do you have? Die. 2 dice. So these did not have numbers written on them, but they had the corresponding number of little circles on each face of the die, so that you had 6, a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, and so on. And now you had, after 3 months, from finding the first one, we found the second one, about 3 feet away, and on the mosaic floor, another mosaic floor that's in the new discovery that's absolutely extraordinary. Of course, we find lots of coins. Probably in the entire digging between 2009 and today, we've probably found in the range of maybe almost up to 1,500 coins. And none of them are younger than the first century. Wow. In the synagogue discovery, the youngest coin we found was 67. And the most valuable coin was a gold 42. But last year alone, 2011, we found over 1,000 coins. We dug up a number of different places. We had 360 volunteers from 16 countries, wonderful young people, university students. And actually one of the volunteers was from Chicago, and she was only 83 years of age. She spent a lot of time trying to sort out a piece of pottery and join them together. And that's obviously another discovery, pottery. And mostly you find broken pottery. And, you know, when you see a piece of pottery and the archaeologist is telling you, well, what you're digging up there now, padre or student, that piece of pottery is first century. And then you start learning what first century pottery looks like. And then you say, well, who held this jar last? Was it Mary Magdalene? Was it something that broke in Jesus' hand? You know, well, we can, be a little facetious. So then you find, for example, this piece of pottery here has holes in it. And this was found this past summer, and it is probably a piece of pottery for warm food, and it probably had a crack and was no longer useful for the food, so they bored holes in the bottom of it for a secondary usage, and they used it as a scoop to scoop up a fish out of little ponds, because they would keep the fish in ponds since they didn't have refrigeration, so they'd keep them alive and they'd be swimming, and then they'd scoop up and take out a fish when they needed to sell it or cook it or whatever, And so they're pretty well sure that that piece of pottery was used for that purpose in the first century. Yeah. Isn't that amazing? And then we have this jar here, which is reassembled, and it looks nice, even though it has all the cracks, you see. But then we found this other piece that's so beautiful pottery that doesn't have even one crack or scratch or breakage. It's just, we found at the bottom of a mikveh, a 7-step purification ritual bath. We found 3 of them last year. Amazing. In a very close proximity, in a very small space, with one road dividing the 3 of them. There were 2 basically in one building and 1 in an adjoining building across the road. And it's amazing to find this quality of mikveh, of purification bath. And one of them was spring-fed with beautiful crystal clear water today. It's absolutely amazing. And then we have these. This is a weight. It's like a little bit pyramidal metal object that's maybe about 1 inch high. And it's obviously heavy because it's metal, and it has a little, what would you call that? A little ear, and you could probably tie a string there. And it's the archaeologists know that was a weight, and they'd have a bunch of them. They'd tie them to the nets to sink them into the water, because the nets, maybe if they held air in the fibers and that, they'd be slow to sink to do the fishing, and the fish might be gone by that time. But they put in this weight so the nets went down. And then this is a nail from the boat. They have found cosmetic stuff for ladies' care, and jars for perfumes. And we even found tear bottles for gathering tears. That's a custom, in the Bible times. There's a line in the Bible which says, God will gather up all our tears. How consoling. And we find tear bottles. There's actually a collection of them in Nazareth at the Basilica of the Annunciation, and a little museum there. And we have found a number of tear bottles, and they're very small, they're just there about 2 inches high, and maybe a little less, and narrow, and little made of glass usually. And then they used to gather the tears, for example, at the first moments of bereavement from the relatives, and sometimes it would be buried with the deceased to show the affection, like we would throw a flower into a grave today. It's amazing to be digging up the kind of life of the time. This is the spot where we found that beautiful pot that was not cracked or broken. And then you have this floor here, which is extraordinary. The Israeli archaeologists say it's the most best conserved and best built floor of the first century ever found in Galilee. The location is absolutely splendid. The inspiration from the place is powerful. Everybody is welcome. So, I think we should have lots of visitors coming soon to visit Magdala. We actually have already. It's open now provisionally while we continue construction and excavations. We welcome volunteers to come. It would be wonderful to have. We have actually a young Englishman right now from London who's digging for the last month at the site.
So today you're still digging on the site, looking and hopefully finding new things there?
Yes, we've received a license from the Israeli Antiquities Authority to dig 12 acres. And last year, as I mentioned, we had 360 volunteers from 16 countries, and we could take a lot more. And it's so exciting. Imagine for a young person to have on their resume the fact that they spent 1 month digging up a first-century town in the Middle East, particularly in the core of the Bible around the Sea of Galilee.
So anybody can come and apply and to be a volunteer there to do some digging?
Basically, yes. There aren't pre-required technical skills. The only thing, obviously, is the ability to be a team player, to be able to do humble work like carrying a bucket of clay, sieving, with very attentive eyes to watch if you notice an old coin, because you can't really see them directly. It's hard to distinguish them from the dirt because they're all smeared with clay, and they have aged. Maybe they've gotten a little worn, and so it takes a sharp eye to notice there's a coin there. In fact, I was digging once there a couple of years ago with some visitors from the United States, and then immediately one of the more experienced people on the site that are digging all the time said, "There, you found 2 coins, Father." And I said, "Where are they?" And she said, "There and there." And I said, "Well, you found them. I didn't. I'd have thrown them away with the bucket of clay." So it's very exciting. It's very educational because you see how history is made. You discover the layers of civilization on top of layers of civilization, and you see the work the archaeologists do that's so painstaking, and then you see the evidence coming to light so the historians can write the account of new aspects of life that we didn't see before in these places. And so then you can be critical of the works of Flavius Josephus, or then you can discover that maybe what he was saying was actually right, and or was closer to reality than maybe was credited to him 30 years ago by some academics. And even the same applies for the gospel, because there were times in the last century when people denied academically that there were such a thing as synagogues until after the temple was destroyed. Now imagine the hole you blow through the gospel if you took out synagogues before the temple was destroyed. But actually, currently, it's certain that there were 7 synagogues from the 1st century discovered already. So the synagogues were a phenomenon of the society at the time. So this also gives a note of verification of the gospel story. And that's useful in a time when we're approached by many skeptics and we have our own doubts, and we see, well, wow, we found a synagogue from the 1st century from prior to temple destruction. It's just wonderful.
So what's your prayer finally for this site, and what you want to see God doing in this site?
Well, that's a beautiful one, Paul. I would pray that this wonderful gift which providence provides, I would even go so far as to say as all of humanity. It's obviously very special for us Christians. For us Catholics, we happen to own it, but obviously I would be very happy that somebody who's not a Catholic as a Christian would say, we have a synagogue in Galilee. I would be very happy to hear another Christian, a Baptist or a Presbyterian or an evangelical, say, we have a menorah, the oldest menorah in the world. I would be very happy if I heard a Jew saying, we have the oldest menorah in the world in Galilee in a synagogue in Magdala. And then I would be very happy that any human being without any faith would say, we have this treasure in Magdala. And so that we could come together, that we could begin, or not begin, but continue on this path that we are presently, thank God, walking along, of recognizing each other's dignity, each other having a greater mutual respect for each other's faith, and a greater deepening of each other mutually, of our own faith and the faith of others, so that we can live in a greater togetherness as a family on our planet, on this earth, in a time when there are lots of strains in the family, in our society, between cultures, between religions, so that we can overcome all this selfishness, recognize the differences, the richness of each tradition, and then work together to continue to grow into the family that God wants us to be.
So anybody who'd like to know more about the work that you're doing at Magdala, or even want to get involved, what's your website address?
The website is very simply magdalacenter.com, www.magdalacenter.com, and its center is spelled like the Americans do, unfortunately, so forgive me, you good English people. magdalacenter.com, and there you'll find a lot of information. You'll find a wonderful 9-minute DVD called Discovery at Magdala, which will give you a good summary of the beauty of the Holy Land, the scope of the project, the surprise discovery of the synagogue, and then its significance to bring people together.
Okay, Father Kelly, thank you very much.
God bless you, Paul. God bless this work you do, and God bless all of our listeners.